And it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer, really, standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes, and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. Our live shows are right here at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please remember to visit the website, podcastufo.com. Check out the latest blogs and forums. And while you're there, don't forget to like our very active Facebook page.
Hello, I'm Martin Willis, and welcome to the show. We have a very special guest today, and it's Colby Landrum. He'll be coming up soon. He'll be talking in his own words of what happened on December 29th, 1980, with himself, Betty Cash, and his grandmother, Vicki Landrum. We'll also be joined by researchers Chris Lambright and Curt Collins, and they'll all be coming up right after the break. Before we get started, though, we have a special guest on right now, and it's Alejandro Rojas from OpenMinds. How you doing, Alejandro?
Doing good. How are you?
Good. Now, you got some pretty awesome clips going viral. They're from the 1940s through 1960s that Wendy Connors and Roderick Dyke had compiled. Can you please fill us in on that?
Yeah, this is really cool, and I've got to thank a couple guys, Isaac Coy and Giuliano Marinkovic. They are some archivists, UFO archivists of sorts. They go out there and they find a lot of files and put them together, such as FBI files or Air Force files, and then they send that out to UFO researchers. And I've been lucky enough to be on their email list, and they've put together some really great stuff. And this is a unique one that I had never heard about. Like you said, Wendy Connors and Roderick Dyke put together these audio files. I guess it was started by Wendy Connors. She decided to do this and call these compilations of audio files faded discs. But there's some really hard to find audio interviews, largely from the beginning of UFO research. Back in the 40s and the 50s, she remastered these audios and put them together on discs, and they're really cool clips. A lot of them are pretty short because they're short interviews that were on radio or something like that. But they go all the way back to the beginning of the investigation in this. And a lot of people don't know that there were a lot of UFO flaps going on, or UFO waves going on. Back when this all started, we all heard of Kenneth Arnold in 1947. Really, there were a lot of UFO sightings at that time. Kenneth Arnold was just a credible person who kind of became the poster child for, credible people seeing these things, and really made this a big deal. And so the Air Force got involved in researching. But there's a lot of other really good cases out there. In these files that Wendy Connors had found or retrieved, there are U.S. Air Force personnel from the 40s that are recounting their interest in the topic or their own personal sightings. You have scientists and others talking about this. I don't think people realize that in the 40s and the 50s, when all of this started, that it was a really serious topic. In fact, the Air Force's first project looking into this, Project Stein, had decided that, extraterrestrials were a valid possibility as to the nature of UFOs. They got a little bit in trouble for including that in their final analysis, and it was eventually removed.
Right.
But and things changed. They began debunking more. But yeah, there's a really interesting history that is preserved here in these audio files.
They're absolutely great. I love listening to them, and I'm going to spend more time doing that. And it's great, hearing the way people used to talk. And there's kind of like an innocence to the whole thing as well, too.
Definitely. I mean, they were going into it more curious about what is this. It wasn't more of, if you read Captain Ruppelt's book, he ran Project Blue Book, and he reviews Project Sign, Project Grudge, and he reviews how this all evolved and how at first, it was, like you said, a very innocent and a very above board look into what is going on before the Air Force started getting upset about negative comments and PR problems that they had run into. So it's an interesting history, and you can hear that played out in these files. But yeah, people had taken everything very seriously, and you can see that there was this battle in the military, and it still goes on in sorts. This idea that not everybody is all of one mind. People are arguing about the nature of what's going on, the significant, whether these are mundane objects or not, whether they're Russian or something possibly extraterrestrial, which some people did entertain that idea.
Looks like Sam Moranto is joining us here right now. So, Sam, go ahead and fire a question at Alejandro Rojas.
A lot of people today coming into the field haven't a clue, especially many of the skeptics. And that's something I find so amusing when they don't understand the history. And it's very annoying, as you know, trying to combat them, and they have no knowledge whatsoever. They're under the impression that everything began in 47, and that's it. I have a case that came from 1920. A case from Indiana. And so at least if you could get that 1947 material, which was a huge wave, my gosh, we had cases here in Illinois, all across the world, like you said, Alejandro. They were all over the place. This was a very big year for UFOs, but it wasn't the first.
Right. First, I'd like to say hello, Sam.
Well, hello, my friend.
Some of the files in here, like you said, and that's what makes it kind of good writing about this stuff all the time. There's kind of a short-term memory, and a lot of people getting into this realm right into the topic now don't know a lot of the history, so when you write about it, it's news to them. For instance, a lot of them don't know about Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was the Air Force consultant, scientific consultant on investigating UFO cases. He was a skeptic at first, but he changed his mind over time. And a lot of these audio files have interviews with him where you hear him doing some of this debunking, but then also you hear over time how his views changed. And in the later years where you hear the interviews where he really thinks there should be scientific study and how he was disappointed in the Air Force research.
That's right. Absolutely. Hey, well, it's time for a break, and thanks so much, Alejandro. And guess
Thank
what,
you.
Sam? I'm going to be dropping you like a hot potato because I don't have room to have everyone on.
Alejandro, be talking to you. Take care.
You too.
See
All
you,
right.
Martin.
So, hey, thanks so much, Alejandro. And Sam, we'll be talking to you next week. All right, hang in for this break. We have Colby Landrum recorded live with Chris Lambright and Curt Collins coming right up. Colby, you there?
Yes, sir. Sure am.
Hey, Colby Landrum, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. How are y'all doing?
Great. Colby, I'd like you to meet on the show with us right now is Chris Lambright and Curtis Collins.
Nice to meet you. I guess I missed you the 2 times back in 1985 that I actually went down and talked to your grandmother. So it's nice to talk to you after all this time.
Yeah, it is sure nice. Big welcome from Texas.
I'm actually up in West, the town that blew up not long ago.
Oh,
so
really?
I'm still here, yes. I was in Dallas at the time, but I'm in West right now.
Right.
This is Curt. I found out that your grandmother was from Mississippi. That's where I'm from. So, we might be cousins.
Good beans.
So I'm just going to sit back here and let you two, Curtis and Chris, both both did some work on the case. And, Colby, I think, this is kind of a rare appearance. You haven't been, I know you're on UFO Hunters, but I don't know if you've ever been interviewed before. And I think basically we'd like to hear in your own words what happened, what you recall that happened, not what other people told you, but what you recalled what happened back in December of 1980.
Okay, first of all, my grandmother and I and Betty Cass, we all took off on our excursions. They always did. They liked to play bingo a lot. So we traveled over to New Caney, to a place they thought was having bingo. And at that particular night, there was no bingo. So they drove around trying to find other places. And then we tended to make our way down 2100 to the actual site of the occurrence. So after that, we seen a bright object coming from the left side of the road, which would be north to south, going towards Lake Houston, just above the treetop of the pine trees right there, probably 150 foot or so. The object was a little higher, of course, but we come to a stop, didn't know what it was. And I remember Grandma talking about it was coming, that Jesus was coming back or whatever. She's real religious, so, kind of scared me. I crawled in the floorboard, and my grandmother continued looking out the window, in which Betty Cass, she took it a little bit further and wanted to get out and investigate. What else did y'all want to know?
Well, I've got a question for you. Excuse me. About can you give us a description of of the light and whatever you can say about it, compared to any object, and maybe tell us about the way it moved, if you can remember.
Okay. I don't know if y'all have them up there, but down here in the south we have the water towers. The four-legged water towers that they feed the main cities and everything with. And the object back then, I was comparing it to the size of, the top of the water tank, which I don't really, probably now knowing that I work in refineries and everything, that it seemed to be about 100 foot across, probably 100 foot up and down. No, it's probably 50 foot across and 100 foot up and down.
Man, yeah, that's a question. That was a question that has been somewhat confusing over time, is to get an idea of exactly whether the comparisons to water towers meant from the ground to the very top or just the tank part up at the top. But, I've always been wondering how wide would it be when it came down over the roadway. So if you can, go ahead and describe that, because this is an important thing.
One more time, please, sir.
There's been some confusion, I think, over the years with exactly how large the object itself would have been. So if you recall, right. And I think from what Curt and I have talked about, and I think it may be correct, that you seem to be the person who, even at the young age, seemed to identify it as kind of diamond-shaped or have some kind of a shape that was elongated like that. So we thought that Go ahead. Just keep continuing. We're here to hear what you have to say.
Well, it was, like I say, to me, it was like a diamond shape with flames coming out the bottom, not just massive flames, just the whole thing looked radiated, bright orange, and it actually looked like it was more glowing than on fire. So, it was, as a kid, that seems to stick in your head, a lot of things you don't remember, but this is specifics and everything about the object I do remember. So
yeah, and in fact, that's exactly what we want to hear, the things that you remember, even at that young age. If you were in the car and what you saw, when you say it seemed to be more glowing, do you mean you could actually see the entire outline of the entire object? Or
yes,
just
sir.
See, that's a very important point that I think everybody wants to understand.
Right. It was glowing, very bright orange, yellowish, and of course, being at that age, I was amazed with helicopters and planes just like any other normal child. And I was counting the helicopters around it, which at the time I didn't know what they were, but later on I found out they were the double rotor Chinook helicopters that were whatever they were doing, transporting. I know they wasn't carrying it. I don't know that, but
yeah, if I recall,
like
though. Yeah, my apologies. I was just saying, if I recall, I think from what you described just now, when the object and whatnot came in over the trees and basically paused over the roadway, there weren't any helicopters over it at that moment. So if you're correct,
they were never over it. They were around it and stayed a pretty good distance away. I'd say, close as I can remember, probably they stayed at least 200 or 300 feet, if not 100 yards away from it. It could be longer or shorter, but just to my memory, they were all the way around it. I don't know. None of them was below it, of course, and there might have been one or two way above it.
I've got a lot of questions about, even more about the craft and the helicopters, but go ahead with your story, and then we're probably going to back up to a few points. So,
right, like I said, we paused there for a minute. I can't remember the exact time. It seemed an eternity to me because I was terrified in the floorboard. But they continued. My grandmother was looking through the windshield, and she was frantic, thinking about the second coming of Christ. And like I said, Betty had got out of the car to investigate more, look at it, whatever. Grandmother was telling her to get back in the car. Well, of course, I'm terrified in the floorboard, and I'd peek out every now and then. But
it was interesting you mentioned that, because we were curious whether the fact that you had been down low and would peek up every now and then might have actually the dashboard, for example, may have in fact blocked some of the brightness and given you a little better look at the thing, just because of the nature of the fact that you were short. Now, I was curious, when do you think, if you remember, did you get the best look at the object or the shape of it, or the longest time
I would say when we was approaching, and at the very beginning I was looking, and like, of course, back then there was no car seats or anything, and we stood up in the back of the seats and everything. So my mom had always told me when we passed a cop, we were outlaws, or she was, that she would tell me to get in the floorboard so she can get a ticket or whatever. So that was just like a natural routine for me. But
see, that makes absolute sense when you think back. Right. That as you were approaching it is when you would really have more of a chance, probably less frightening at that instant, and get a better look at it. But go ahead and let Curt ask some of the questions. He's been doing most of the research recently on double checking things that have been said afterwards, or things that have come out, trying to get down to the real truth of what went on.
Absolutely, that's ultimately what I want.
Well, yeah, I want to hear more of your story. I get the impression that, and a lot of people don't realize that when you first saw it, that wasn't apparently the end of the story. You continued to see it as you traveled. Is that right? And I'd like to hear. Just about the rest.
As we paused, like I said, the craft paused for a few minutes, and it carried on. And as we went down the road, it kind of made a path towards Lake Houston. And, I come up out the seat once we got some distance, and, you could feel the heat off of it even inside the car. Like I said, my grandmother, where she put her hands on the dash, actually left a hand imprint on it. We found out later on. We didn't know it at the time, but I don't know where the car is now. I wish I had my hands on it. But like I say, we continued to travel home, and I think they contemplated about, once we got home, they contemplated about calling somebody and letting them know. And of course, back then, everybody was going to think that we were complete morons or whatever, so they were skeptical about that. And my grandmother, she was always an adamant woman about, she wanted to find out what it was, and she didn't care what people thought. And So, as days, like a day or two went on, I know my grandmother and I, Betty, she got the worst of it. I actually had blisters on my skin, on my face. I had flu-like symptoms. I had to miss a few days of school out of it. It's almost like a sunburn kind of feeling sick. You know how you get flu symptoms when you get sunburned? And after a while, I believe they contacted L.L. Walker, and it was crazy because him and his wife actually also seen it. They were taking a trip or whatever. And he was an officer in Dayton.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring him up because I had just pulled up some information, I think, from John's book, and Curt and I had talked about this before, that I just had an odd feeling about the fact that he saw those helicopters a couple of hours or so later, but further back towards the east, meaning just not down south and not flying out over the coast. And in fact, if you wanted to try to avoid as much populated area as you could, making a U-turn, so to speak, and heading back somewhere over east would have been the place to go. So it really negated the whole idea that no one else saw the helicopters or that they weren't somewhere, and nothing was flying that night.
And it just so happened to be a law enforcement agent, and he was a straight-up man. You know, he don't lie about anything. And he's still same way to today. He's just a little older and sicker. But
I mean, I think it's a question that I've always had to wonder how you would feel about not law enforcement in general, but the fact that not just you and your grandmother and Betty, but here's another police officer who he and his wife both saw the helicopters, and everyone who's supposed to be investigating it seems to just be claiming, well, nobody had any helicopters out, nobody could find them, which is in effect calling everybody, well, I don't know what you'd call that, but it kind of makes you wonder how confident you would feel with anything that you're told by authorities these days. I mean, I don't know if you've had feelings after that.
I've got, like our sheriff, Captain Ken DeFore over here now. He's kind of like, he was my Little League coach also, and he's an excellent man. He helped me out. I've helped him out on EquiSearch several times. He's a very stand-up man. I had no problem with law enforcement other than Mr. Coroner Saran that I did the show with on UFO hunters. I don't care too much for him because that day in particular, I was ready to climb on him, Texas style. But
I would like you to elaborate on that, if you don't mind my asking.
Well, we come face to face. They did their little skit and everything, and there wasn't no skit. It was just, I didn't even know they was bringing the man in. And he sat out there and they asked him, was there any possibility that there was any aircraft in that vicinity that night? And he said, absolutely not. If you look at the film, you can see my whole face gets red. I've got a temper like an Irishman. So, he sent me into a mode that I was ready to just whoop it, what out of him. So I had to refrain myself on that.
Yeah, you would think at that stage he would find a better way to express that, knowing that he's in effect calling you and everyone else, they're either liars or badly mistaken or something to that effect.
And there was also pilots that come out later on and said, yes, they were in a mission in the area in that night, but they couldn't elaborate on it. So, I mean...
My sound just went dead. Are we still there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Colby, I want to come back to about the helicopters in a minute, but just kind of continue with the story in order. Okay, you talked about a little bit about the way that you felt. I want to know, what else you know about the other, the other witnesses being sick, and anything you remember at the hospital. And
Go ahead. I remember, after a while, they'd contacted the authorities and everything, and I can't remember exactly how the steps went. I should have looked back at my manuscripts and all that a little bit more, but, I can remember the kid, them coming out to the house several times. I don't know who they were, whether government officials or what, they would come out and test us for radiation every so often. And I don't know what they come up with. I've never seen any results on that. I was told to be careful because somebody could scoop me up and take me away. So, I was always nervous about that. And then, we went to the hospital, got checked out, and I can't remember exactly what they said. But,
Well, that's okay. Just what you remember.
Right.
Well, at the hospital, the way the story's been told, and really, I get the kind of feeling that there's what happened to you, your story, and then the story that's been on TV. So, I want you to straighten that out at some point. But do you remember how the story really got out?
I can't remember who was contacted. I think the local news was contacted or something like that. And at some point, Mr. John Schuessler, at the time he was with NASA, come in to help us out. And I guess he was trying to advocate our story and get it out there, so we could just come up with some kind of conclusion of what's wrong and, get some help on the medical part of it. Because, my family wasn't rich. So, we just want to know what happened because, I thought my whole life and still do to the day sometimes if somebody says the wrong things about it. That right there pretty much built my temper up. And, if somebody comes across the wrong way, I can't tell you what happened today because, I still have ill feelings about it.
Yeah, I don't know how comfortable you are talking about those feelings, but certainly understandable. And you've got years of frustration, and it may have contributed to the downfall of the health of your grandmother and Betty. So, let's see. I wanted to ask you too about what was and you're bound to remember this because it lasted the rest of your life. How did this affect the way people related to you? Were you treated more as a celebrity, or did you get picked on? How did that go?
No, it wasn't celebrity. It was, I had my friends. I had a lot of great friends there in Dayton, and still to the day support me 100%. But there was also the other ones that wanted to play, bully type and come at me and mouth off. Back then, I didn't care if they was 6'7". If they said it in the wrong place at the wrong time, I was trying to get on them. And it just built a lot of anger inside me, because I know what I've seen. And for them to ridicule me, it ain't going to happen here. So, it's obviously affected me mentally throughout all of this, even to the day. With my temper-wise, I have a hard time controlling it. And, a lot of the reason I want to get this story out there is so my daughter, when she grows up, she'll know exactly what happened and maybe hopefully find the truth somewhere in there.
Well, I wanted to ask you, I've got 1,000 questions for you, but as far as the truth, have you ever come across anything that you thought was a good lead in the source of, and also, just what do you think the object was?
I'm a firm believer that it was an object that the government was experimenting on. And at that time, there wasn't very many people there in that flight path. They probably wouldn't have seen too many people because it wasn't built in the subdivisions and all that yet. It was still just wide open woods, a few people out there. So, that's my theory on it. That it is some kind of experiment they was working on, and we just happened to come in contact with it.
And what about?
Go ahead.
Oh, the other part of that was, did you have any ideas from? Maybe any particular base it was from. Have you gotten just any clues whatsoever?
Well, there was a theory that they come up with when we did that one show that it come off an aircraft carrier and kind of went through up around, I don't know if you're familiar with Texas, but the Orange Beaumont area, maybe even on the Louisiana side. it made like a north loop off the Gulf, kind of tracked back to the west, and then come back up. I don't know if they was trying to stay in the secluded areas or what, and I don't know if that's just something that they dreamt up. I don't know where they got that information from, but I mean, it seems feasible that they were going to carry it somewhere from the aircraft carrier in the Gulf. But I have no proof to, back me up on that.
Well, we're looking for clues, and one of the things that might help us, if it was a project, and everybody's got their own theory, do you remember enough about the way it looked to describe how it flew? Because if we knew something about what was propelling it, apparently there was no wings. Just how did it move?
It was floating, and I mean, in my eyes as a child, it was floating, and like I say, it was floating or being carried by cables, but I've never seen no cables or nothing. So I'm saying it was, I don't know what the word that is, not a technical word, but it was actually just kind of floating along, and it looked like the helicopters were pretty much escorting.
Colby, I'm sure we're going to talk about the helicopters because that's kind of a fascinating part of this, but are you willing to take calls if we have them come in? Because I have a number here I can give out.
Yeah, I sure will.
Okay, the number here is 603-967-4030. If anyone wants to give a call, that's 603-967-4030. Can we talk a little bit about the helicopters? Because I've heard numbers sometimes. You hear that there was like 100 of them or there was 15 of them. And
sir.
Tell us what you think.
There was 23 Chinook helicopters, and that I can tell you for a fact because I counted them. And I do remember that distinctly. Like I said, I was fascinated with helicopters, so that's pretty much what I was looking at.
And they're Chinook, you pretty sure?
Yes, sir. It was a double rotor Chinook. I didn't know that then, but after years of research and looking into it, yeah, that's definitely what they were.
I've got a question about the helicopters, and I've heard a lot of other things from reading John Schuster's book and the magazine articles. So I really want to hear your side of it. But I have heard that helicopters were observed at when you were coming home to Dayton. Do you remember anything about that? I mean, that means there could have been even more than the 23 you counted.
I don't remember that part.
Okay, that's fair enough.
I wish I did, but for a long time.
Oh well, that's.
I
sure.
I remember seeing them. I remember seeing the helicopters with the object till we got like on 1960, headed back towards Dayton. But being all frantic and everything, I was kind of up and down. So.
Well, that's a good point. I'm glad you mentioned that because some of the stories make it sound that fear continued and you were afraid of helicopters later. And it just, I got the impression that you might have had post-traumatic stress. Do you think that's fair to say?
Oh, that's definitely fair to say. It stresses me out, a lot just talking about it and people, ridiculing. So, yes, sir. That's something that'll stick with me the rest of my life. But as far as fear of helicopters, no, I'm still fascinated with them. And the helicopters wasn't what I was scared of. I don't know, a sense of safety, maybe. Because I thought maybe our government was taking care of the situation if it was one.
Well, that's another question. At your age, you may not have a memory of this, but I want to ask the question. Your grandmother, and I've heard recording her in her own words, originally thought that this might be the second coming. And I don't know if you felt the same way, but at what point did you change your mind to think that the object itself was military rather than, that this was some kind of spiritual event?
I didn't know. My grandmother, she tended to carry things a little far. She was very biblical and religious. So, I never really thought that it was a second coming. But at the time, as a child, you're listening and you're terrified. You're not sure what's going on. You're not sure. You don't even know about military.
Well, we're getting back to the UFO again, because that's other than the injuries, it's really the star of the story. I just want to know, just when you came up on it, if you compare the brightness, was this like a sunset or an explosion? Just what can you say what it kind of looked like?
With the object?
Right. Just the impression, because with the fear that it inspired, I'm just curious as to what kind of, just what it looked like. I wasn't there, and hoping you could tell us.
And it kind of looked like it was on fire in a sense, but it looked like it was on fire, glowing, with fire coming out of the bottom.
Okay.
And not really a fire, just glowing, more of a glowing sense.
Curt, I'd like to ask him a question since we're talking about the object. And a little while ago when he was talking about being on the floorboard, and he made the comment that he could feel the heat from the object, even inside the car where he was, which definitely suggests that right underneath the object should have been that much hotter. But there's always been some question over where exactly on that, I think it's a 5 or 7 mile straight stretch of road, it actually occurred. And of course, the discussion about some claims that the road may have been pulled up and taken away. But then John, when he got involved a couple of months later, had written that they went back out there and found the exact place on the road. But I drove down there when I went to talk to your grandmother, and I realized then that, like you were saying, it's not developed, and there's hardly any lights and no nothing. And at 9 o'clock at night, under those circumstances, man, I don't know how easy it would be to really know exactly what 100-foot stretch of that road, all of this had taken place on. And I was curious if you, over the years, ever went back there, or ever, in your opinion, found where you think the actual spot on, might have been. And
Hey, hang on just a minute. Can you hold that thought, gentlemen? We have a caller on the line. Caller, go ahead and introduce yourself, if you would, please.
Hi, my name is Peggy.
Peggy.
Hi. I have a question. I don't know if maybe I missed it. I don't think I did, but I'm very curious about the women in the car and what they were saying, especially the one that got outside of the car. Wasn't she at some point struck by a beam of light, and that's how she got so badly radiated?
Well, it was the heat coming off of. Y'all could feel the heat through the car, but through the windshield. And I'm not exactly sure what she was saying. We were all so frantic. We wasn't sure what was going on. I think she was more under the impression. She was more under the impression that she wouldn't know what it was. She wasn't as scared as my grandmother.
Good for her. Another question: when you first saw this object, were the helicopters right there from the very beginning?
They was with it the whole way. Yes, ma'am, it was.
The whole time, from the moment you first sighted it.
Yes, ma'am. That's why I'm under the impression it's an escort. So they were definitely escort mode. That's no problem, ma'am.
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for being so strong.
It's hard, but you got to do it.
Thank you, Peggy.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So we're back here, and go ahead, Chris. You had just a quick recap of your question, if you would.
Well, the question came up because Curt and I actually began to really realize how confused we were over the exact place on that perfectly straight stretch of road where the incident would have occurred, because I realized it was dark, no lights, perfectly straight, and suddenly all of this happens. And I believe your grandmother had said that she even didn't go back into that area for weeks afterwards. And then John Schuessler came along, and apparently 2 months after the fact went there and made some statements that they found a place where the road had been damaged and they knew exactly where they were. But at the same time, we've heard the stories, and even I believe I've maybe misquoted them, but the road had been chopped up and hauled off. And so the question came up well, how do we really know exactly? And could anybody have honestly found the exact 100-foot stretch where all of this took place? But did you, after all that time and all these years, have you ever gone back and looked around and feel that you ever were able to locate exactly where this would have taken place?
There was only one store on that road, on the north side of the road, 2100, and it was kind of a landmark. So from there to where we was at, I've estimated probably about a mile and a half, 2 miles. And you could also tell shortly after, people in the area, I'm not sure who they talked to, but they said they seen black trucks come in at night, like dump trucks and equipment, and they actually dug that section of the road up and repaved it.
See, and that was my question on reading what Curt had, because your mother, or grandmother rather, told me that exactly, which I began to think, okay, well, when did that occur? Because John wrote that 2 months, I think he got involved around February 22nd, and around the very last part of February, he actually had gone back out there and claimed that they found the place on the road where the damage had been, which would suggest either the road was hauled away after that, or they hadn't found John wasn't in the right. It was confusing, if you understand. I mean, it's like, what happened when? So I just was never quite sure at this point, even with my own, my own understanding of how things happened. If you went back later, or you're sometime later on and really had a good idea of exactly where that would have, because if the heat was as intense as you say, I can't help but imagine there would have been dead grass, dead trees, shortly after sometime.
Yeah, so now, it was a long time before I went down that road. Probably, I stayed away from it. Even when I go down it today, it brings back old memories. But we actually did a show with another contractor out of California, and we went back and took core samples of where the road was supposed to be pulled up. But Mr. Schuessler, he worked for NASA, and he was on top of things. I mean, he was a wonderful man. I've sometimes wondered, did he know something? Is that why he's helping us out, being working for NASA so long?
Yeah, Colby, I want to ask you something. When I first contacted you, you were a little hesitant to come on the show. Well, I'd say a little more than hesitant. And it's basically painful for you to talk about this. How have you fared with that whole thing over all these years?
It took me a long time to get over it, and I guess after my grandmother passed away, I kind of felt, because she was so adamant about finding out, I felt like that was, I felt like that was my, tribute to, what she believed in, to keep fighting and try to find out what actually happened. But, and it took me a long time until I got older and was able to deal with the fact that I didn't care what anybody said, and I'm still not too excited about talking about it, but that's one thing that I'm trying to work through, the process of being angry and mad, and I'm just trying to fight through, and go on, move on with my life and try to find out what happened, Surely somebody knows, ex-pilot or something, maybe somebody can talk about it now and understand what me and my family went through, and, have the heart to help us out with some truth.
Do you feel as though, if you had to put the blame on something out there, do you think you more or less think it might be an experimental government craft, and that's what a lot of people have more or less thought over the years? There's
not a doubt in my mind.
Yeah. Do you actually blame the government then for this whole thing?
Yes, I sure do. It wouldn't be so bad if they just come out and admit to it and put it behind it. Instead of leaving people wondering what it was, the little green men theory, which I don't believe. If I haven't seen it, I don't believe it. What I seen that night, everything points back to the government. And nobody will ever tell me any different unless they come up with some other theory and they can tell me exactly what happened.
Well, Colby, if you don't mind exchanging some information with me over the show, I came across a researcher, and he had a very good suggestion that if you were to sign a privacy waiver and you submit a Freedom of Information Act request, that might allow some documents that would otherwise be withheld to be released. Now, that's a long shot, but as far as I know, that hasn't been tried. Would you go along with that?
Yes, sir, I sure would. But, like I said, I'm a pipe supervisor in a refinery now, and I really don't know anything about doing all that. So if I had somebody guiding me, I'd be more than glad to do that.
We'll just need your name on a piece of paper, and we'll do the rest.
Okay, as long as the paper is well-defined and nobody's trying to step on me nowhere, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can check it out. Now, this is we're trying to look out for you too. I mean, we're curious, but certainly don't want to to get you hurt in any way.
No, I'm not worried about the government. If they want me, they can come get me. I ain't going down fighting. They ain't taking my guns either. So I'm on down to Texas. I'll talk to them. But yes, I really want to do that.
I don't know how much time we've got left. One question I had for you was, I mentioned this briefly earlier. What do you think people have gotten wrong in covering the story over the years?
I mean, everybody wants to hear the theory of aliens and all that. And everybody's entitled to believe what they want, whether it happened or where it didn't. But I know what I seen that night. And like I said, if I haven't seen the green men, I don't believe it. Until I see one, then we'll talk. But as of right now, I'm a firm believer in what I said. The government has got a secret that they're keeping from us, just like many other secrets. So until something else is told to me, and behind a government official or something, that's what I'm going to believe till the day I die.
Well, some people aren't as interested in this because aliens aren't involved. And to them, I say that whatever muscles the government's using to keep your case secret, they would keep to use anything else secret. So anything we learn about this would help any other case. So, it would help everyone. And
yeah.
I
mean, I'm not saying that there wasn't some type of alien form involved, but show me some proof, you know what I mean? And if they show me some proof and it is, then I'll believe it. But still, the government knows whatever happened. And I think as a citizen and everybody else has a right to know.
I think our time is short. I did want to ask you about the legal case. Do you have any memories of that and what you think might have gone wrong?
What's that?
Oh, the lawyer, Peter Gerson, was trying to take the case to court. Do you remember anything about that?
Yes, I remember looking at the documents. Like I said, I kind of went into recluse mode and I wouldn't go along with a lot after I got older. Of course, we did That's Incredible and Good Morning America and all that, but that was, that was just me. I was traveling and wasn't worried about it. But after I got older, I didn't want to have anything to do with it.
I got in touch with a couple of people who had covered the case, and you mentioned That's Incredible. Robert Zimmerman, who was a photographer, he said that he remembered you three very well. It was an incredible story, and he said, I spoke with them over a 3-day period, and they seemed absolutely credible and honest in their account. And most people that I've been able to reach that ever dealt with you, they felt that the story was true, and they can't say what it was, but now, I think there were some problems in the investigation by John Schuessler. Some things are inaccurate, but I think anybody that's taken a look at it feels something happened, but just can't say what it was.
If anybody ever knew my grandmother, she was the most honest person you'd ever meet. I mean, she didn't lie about nothing. There may have been some things that she didn't quite remember or get it right, but I'm sorry, I'm still upset.
Well, Colby, it's been a real pleasure talking to you today, and I really appreciate the courage you had to come forward and actually, give your side of this story.
Well, I appreciate y'all giving me the opportunity to come on, and like I say, anything that y'all can do to help me out to find out the truth, especially for my grandmother, then I'd be more than grateful.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Also, I want to thank you both, Curt and also Chris, for coming on. And I don't think we had too many glitches this show. So for a live show, the first one, I think it went fairly well. Poor Chris, you kept dropping out. Nobody knows that, but Chris...
No kidding. I have so many questions. It's my internet.
Your internet cut out about 5 times. That's you to go away and come back.
No kidding. What a pain.
We got 1 minute left, Chris, if you have a quick question. Pick your best one.
I don't think I cover them in a dozen times, but I was asking about the effects that, if he recalled, and I'd read something about ridges on the fingernails, whether those showed up within days or weeks, or if he recalls anything about that, about effects on his fingernails.
Right.
No, sir, I don't recall anything about that. I wish I did. Like I said, I was 7 years old at the time, and a lot of it I just blocked out.
This is it for the show tonight. I want to thank you, all of you, for joining us. And we have Kerry Lloyd Whitehouse. He does the music for the show. He's a fan of the show, and he's in Ireland. And we'll be back next week, Sam Moranto. And it looks like we may have Richard Dolan on next week. I'm not sure right now, but he gave a thumbs up. So we'll be back same time next week. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Colby.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Nice talking to you.
Yes, sir.
So that's it for our live show. Before I go, I do want to say that if anyone has any information at all on the Cash-Landrum case, please do contact me, martin@podcastufo.com. I will pass any of the information given to me directly to Curt Collins, who's doing an ongoing investigation on this. Thank you all for listening. And remember, if you want to listen live, check out darkmatterradio.net every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. EST or 1 a.m. UTC GMT.
Thank you for listening to our show, and please remember to check out our website, podcastufo.com, for the latest blogs and forums. We will be back next week. Thanks again, and remember, keep your eyes to the sky.